Hello, everybody, and welcome to Live on Mars. And in this episode, we bring you Khash Sajadi, the CEO and co-founder of Cloud66, which is one of the platforms we use, one of the products that we use to build our development products in MarsBased. We have been using it since we started 2014. One of the many reasons why we use it is because it's built with Ruby on Rails, and we have a solid tradition of using all of the products that are either like Bootstrap or built with Ruby on Rails. And some of these products are really befitting these two categories. We have been using Basecamp for many years. We're using Harvest for time tracking and invoicing our clients and managing the distribution of our developers in the projects, and other tools that, we always prefer to pick the ones that are built on Ruby on Rails just to support the ecosystem and just to ensure that these products run a little bit longer with our modest contribution. We have a very technical discussion. This is something I wanted to bring back to the podcast. I mentioned in earlier episodes that I wanted to bring back technical conversations. I think this is what differentiates us from other podcasts where they interview founders that focus on fundraising, they focus on creating the company they want and whatnot. We do that at Startup Grind already, so another way of seeing things differently or doing different things from Startup Grind is to focus on what we do best, which is technology, right? So we discuss a lot of technical things in this conversation with Khash. We discuss their tech stack, how they started with Ruby, transitioning to building more of a Go-oriented tech stack. We talk about technical depth. We talk about the adoption of frameworks in their company, whether this is a top-down or a grassroots movement. We talk about the future of technologies and how we are both perceiving a Rails renaissance because of the companies that are created by people who have been laid off by big companies like Shopify or Stripe or other tech behemoths that are laying off entire teams. And these, in turn, they're like, fuck it, I need to create something else. I need to look for a new gig. Maybe I'm going to give it a go to entrepreneurship, right? So because they have been working with Rails, they know Rails, they pick it as a technology. And as a result of that, we are seeing really, really strong products and Rails coming back strong. And so, all the better for us as a Rails consultancy. It fills our hearts with joy. So without further ado, well, no, there's something else. We wanted to debut something in this podcast, which is the question of the day. We wanted to make this more participative. So for those who are watching the podcast on YouTube, there's this special surprise. I don't think I will be including this in the audio version, just because I have already edited and published this one. Maybe it's gonna come out in the next ones. I don't know. I'm still debating it, but at least we're gonna give it a try in this one. So, question of the day: if you are so kind, share with us the tech stack of your company, right? So, if you're to whatever extent, to whatever amount of detail you want to give. Whether you're like back in PHP, front end React, back end Rails, front end whatever, to the very depths of your tech stack, MySQL, and then we use this for the cron jobs. We use this other thing for microservices and whatnot. Feel free to share it in the comment section below here on YouTube. Will be much appreciated from our side. And who knows, we get to know your company a little bit better. So right now, without further ado, let's jump right into the episode. Awesome. Then welcome to the show. How are you doing, Khash?
Good. Thank you very much for having me.
I don't know if I got your name correctly. It's the first time
That's as close as I ever get.
Awesome. So you're based in London. I assume it's probably business. I don't know if it's business or personal that keeps you traveling from San Francisco to Europe, or how long you staying in London for?
It is a mix of both. So I kind of technically live in both places. I split my time 50% of my time is in London, 50% in the Bay Area, and I have two bases. So I don't know where home is. I think both. So today I happen to be in the UK for another month or so. Yeah.
We will be reviewing a little bit of your background before going into the history of Cloud66, but I like to kind of like weave that into the conversation. So take me back to the early beginnings of Cloud66, because one of the things that usually when you start a company, it is because you have an idea of a pain that you want to solve that you had in a previous company. So I don't know whether that was in Lehman Brothers or not. Where did like deployments and DevOps suck in your previous companies.
Well, they always suck. But interestingly enough, Cloud 66 started as a different company under a different name with a different premise, and then it could have changed over time. So I started like doing computers, as well, in since I was 14. And I've been a developer for a very long time. I've worked in many different places as a developer, and every time I go somewhere and start working, there are certain tasks that, as a developer, you're familiar with, you have to do. And it's not just about setting up workstation and you're finding the favorite ID or whatever the code styling and the flavor of the month is. It is mostly around, I find myself building the same thing over and over again. Whether it's scheduling jobs like a cron job, essentially. And if you're familiar with Java, you have these frameworks like Quartz and other things. Or whether it's building something around backups of database and data, transferring files and everything else. So there are these kind of building components that we constantly always do. Authentication, authorization, we always do those. So when I left finance and IT for finance, um, I was frustrated with that, and basically that's what we started. We started a company called Cloud Blocks, started with that name, and the idea was this is 2013, 2012, so we are about 4 years maybe into App Store idea for phones. The iPhone is probably 6 years old, and we wanted to have an app store for data centers. That was the idea, that you go to this website and you have different apps and you click on this app and you install it on your servers. That was the idea. Now, this is the time that pretty much the only similar thing I would say around it was probably the Amazon images from Bitnami, maybe. So we started kind of that idea, and we put out for the first iteration. We selected 12 common things that we used to do. One of them was deploying a Rails stack because we were running a Rails stack ourselves. And like any good startup, we started measuring and looking at the metrics, and we started to see that that app, amongst the other 12 or 11, was getting a lot of traction. So what we did was we dropped everything, focused on deploying Rails, and we changed the company name because there was another trademark issue to Cloud 66, and that's the rest is history. So we didn't set out to fix deployment. We kind of stumbled upon that as like 12th of the problems that we wanted to solve, and then we realized that deployment on its own can be a business and it's a big problem for customers. Later on, we added other frameworks on top of Rails and other things, non just Ruby, not just Rails. But that's how we started. So you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. It came from a frustration.
It always is. I'm ex Deloitte, ex big consultancies, and we're like, oh, dude, this sucks. Like, if these people can make millions and work like terribly, like we should be able to create a consultancy ourselves, and we
Yes.
did it. Of course, we're never going to be as big, but at least we can sleep at night.
Yeah.
You mentioned you mentioned Rails. It's good that you bring it up because I think like as time goes by, we will become the last man standing in the Ruby on Rails world. Like 10 years ago, every bootcamp was offering Rails, teaching the new developers Rails. And 8 years ago, or seven, they transitioned to doing Node.js and React, right? There's no more Rails. As in, like, Rails has always been dead for many people, yet we see, we see another big wave of Rails-based startups because back in the day, Rails was super popular and it was used by many companies the size of GitHub, Stripe, and whatnot. But now we're seeing the people being laid off from these companies or Shopify, you name it. They're creating the new companies in Rails. So we got a ton of deal flow, but most of the agencies have shut down or they have stopped doing Rails, right? And so there's like, oh, there's too many Rails projects. I don't know. Is this something that you're seeing as well? Because obviously you have a great overview of what's going on in the tech stacks of the companies that you guys help to deploy, right? So what are the particular trends you're seeing in terms of tech stack in the new companies?
That's an interesting question. So you're right that we have some sort of vantage point that we can have a look at what the overall makeup of different things is. And our data might be slightly skewed because we started with Rails and we've got a name and a brand in Rails community. So we kind of get a bit more skewed data around that. But you're absolutely right. We're seeing a kind of revival, I need to say that. But in a different way, I think the survival has arrived at from two angles. One is, um, I would say a sort of a frustration with the plethora of different things that you can find in Node.js and JavaScript. So, React's been a big, huge framework. It's pretty much won the game of the front end for many Node.js. We've had Meteor, we've had, like other things. And even if you look at technologies that are more nascent, like Svelte and other things, even if you look at attraction, React by far is the most popular one. I'm not getting into the religious war or like whether it's the best one or not. It's just about the trend. Um, and the reality is that while it addresses a lot of the front end problems that are about responsiveness and everything else, it does two things that, in my opinion, have they've frustrated the developers. One is this whole idea of single page applications, which suits some use cases and some doesn't. And the other thing, it doesn't have much, at least until now, about the backend. So what is feeding these things? That's hence the popularity of things like Firebase and now Superbase and other things that will just wrap up your backend for many aspects and then feed it. But that's not necessarily for everyone. So there's been this kind of search, if you will, from developers to have something that works for the backend. And if it works for the backend, it might as well just work for the front end. Now, companies or communities like React, for example, they're now kind of going back, and this is a second angle of the kind of popularity resurgence of Rails, is that this community is going back to server-based components, rendering things on server, kind of as if we're going the full circle again.
Yeah.
Just like consuming API and building a DOM front end. Now we're going back all over again, and it's kind of like, if you stand by the river long enough, you see, it's kind of like that. If you hang around long enough in the Node.js community, or you hang around long enough in pretty much any web developer community, you see that the same pattern starts to kind of reemerge over and over again. And I think we are at that point. And given the point in the cycle that we are, Rails is a very strong contender in taking care of both the front and the back. But I think if you look at other communities outside of Rails, and these communities tend to have some sort of silo kind of integration in that sense, that if you are a Rails developer, you're less likely to be involved in, say, like Laravel or other communities around that. If you look at PHP, for example, it's also having a resurgence in that sense that they are trying to kind of get, PHP is older than Rails and still it's having a good day. And I think it's because of this approach that they've taken about hybrid. So kind of adopting to the idea of that I can have a backend that feeds the API and is powerful and has data accessors and all that sort of stuff. But if you want to plug it into React or whatever it is that your front-end developers fancy, you can absolutely do that. And I think to an extent, this resurgence of Rails is going to lead to a hybrid approach where Rails is going to take care of things that are more difficult on the back end, active record, authentication, security, all sorts of things that people kind of want to get right. And then front end, probably Node.js of some flavor, will be there. So that's kind of what we are seeing. We're seeing a hybrid thing emerging from the back end and the front.
Yeah. Actually, I was trying to recall what was the last pure Rails project that we've done, and we're a Rails shop mostly, but we've been doing React now with the Node.js and Python on the back. But the typical pure project in Rails is both back and front, and that was typically more like inward-facing applications like back office stuff and internal tools and all of that. I think it's been like 3 years that we don't do any of this, because even like today, with the popularity of stuff like Prime React, with like build components and kind of like design systems that you just kind of like plug it in and it's good. Like developers like it, designers sort of like it as well. UX UI people are not hating it, and so it's kind of like it works well, and the clients love it because you can then the front end doesn't take away a big chunk of the budget. So,
Right.
but what we're seeing is like Rails is kind of like being just moved back to the back end, if you will, only, and we're seeing less and less Rails front end stuff, which I think it's okay. It's a sign of the times, like not a big deal. Actually, that's a perfect segue to kind of comment on your tech stack. So I seem to recall that you guys built it with Ruby and Rails back in the day, but I'm not 100% sure. So what's your tech stack, and why did you
Yeah,
decide to build it this way?
sure, absolutely. So that's right. We started as a Rails shop. We like our stack is by far still very Rails heavy. Um, Over the time, as you can imagine, Rails is a very good and opinionated framework when it comes to building a web application. I think its strengths lie around Active Record and the whole gem community around the ecosystem that's around that. Um, but the kind of things that we do, like talking to cloud APIs or dealing with Linux APIs and things around firewalls and network manipulation and configuration, having metrics collected, all sorts of things that is not necessarily part of a web stack, a traditional web stack. We started to kind of break it apart into different things. So now our stack is primarily we have a kind of a monolith of Rails where it serves the API and the web at the front. We tend to stay on the top of the Rails or edge Rails. We kind of upgrade and patch all the time. We don't want to leave things lingering on older version of Rails for a long time. And on the back, we run and we host it on Kubernetes ourselves. So it's not,
Hmm.
it's deployed with Cloud 66 kind of inception. And then we have MySQL at the back. And I think it's a MySQL, Memcached, and Redis. So those are kind of the back end data centers. And then we have a lot of Go as
Oh,
a
that's
system
interesting.
language. Yeah,
Hmm.
system programming language. Essentially, we found Go to be a very good tool to build things that communicate internally or talk to Linux or call back over SSH or Git to other systems. So we have that, and they sometimes talk to each other through a kind of an API, or sometimes they rendezvous around the database. So that's primarily our stack right now. On the front end, it is, as I said, Rails, but with JavaScript. So we've
Is it
built.
vanilla JavaScript, or have you been kind of like transitioning from, something like Angular and then React, or going
No, it
through, what
is
was the other one, Ember?
Amber, yes. So no, it
Everybody
is
had it.
vanilla JavaScript. It's vanilla JavaScript.
Okay, good to
Yeah.
know.
So we've been kind of, I think we at some point we forwarded into using Vue.
Hmm.
But that didn't work out really well because nothing against Vue, but because we just had it partially in the system and it was just like a whole asset pipeline and a whole web pack and everything was kind of, went really overly complicated for unnecessary reasons. Um, One thing is that we've built internal applications as well. Like we have a big system called Mission Control, which is um, our kind of window into operations, and it's used by our support team to collect data. We use it for business analysis and everything else. And that is also Rails, but it is Rails with all the new stuff like Hotwire and Turbo Frames, and
Okay.
and we also adopted the Vue components from GitHub into Rails. I think combination of especially for internal tools that is is very appealing when you combine it with things like Tailwind, Vue components, Hotwire. I think it works in a way that primarily allows our developers internally to build something really fast but consistent and coherent for internal consumption.
Yeah, exactly. And it's great hearing this from you for two things. One is you can tell that you built some, like, if not most of it yourself, because you're so on top of your tech stack that you still have it super fresh in your memory. And the second is, it's good to hear because it resonates with pretty much everything that we do when we're building Rails applications. So it seems like we're on the good path, right? You mentioned this Hotwire Turbo, that are the things that we are experimenting in some of our recent projects. And right now, there's one of the things that confirms the theory that Rails is on the surge is that we have seen other tools being built for developers. Like, we're using Avo. I don't know if it's AVO or Avo
Yeah.
as a replacement for Active Admin. We are using Maglev, which is the Locomotive CMS. I don't know if you ever
Yeah.
heard of it, but yeah. So the new iteration of Locomotive, and these tools are really good, like up to nowadays standards, and it helps people build with Rails much more easily, like we used to do 10 years ago. But somehow along the path, we lost these tools because people transitioned to, freaking React and Elixir and whatnot. And kind of like Rails lost its scope, but it's good to it's good to be back in this, or it's good for these people to be back. What are the pros and cons of these tech stack that you have experienced over the years? I mean, I know them, but our audience might not know.
Yes. So if you're talking about the entire tech stacks, it's I think the cohesion, and I kind of tend to you mentioned that our tech stack is very fresh in my mind because yes, you're right. When 10 years ago we started, obviously we were involved. I was involved very much with the tech stack. Right now, I'm not really allowed to touch things because I tend to break more things than I actually fix. So I've kind of resigned to
I
building.
feel you.
Yeah, I'm now basically my job when it comes to tech is building reports and getting data out for business purposes. So that's basically my focus at this point when it comes to the code base. But a couple of things here is kind of interesting. So and I look at frameworks not purely from a technical point of view, but from a business point of view as well. It is about the talent on the market, the community, the size of the pool that you can draw from if you want to hire someone, and a lot of those things play, right? So you might have someone who's a good, say, Rails developer, but they just don't want to do Rails anymore because they want to have exposure to, I don't know, like Svelte, and those are the things that I look at, primarily from that point of view. So when it comes to something like Rails, for example, specifically, I think it's a very good framework because of the whole the fact that it covers the entire stack, front end and the back, and that helps with getting things done really fast because you don't have like the different teams that you have to split the work across and say you okay my backend part is done but I don't know like what about the front end, and then you get to this contract around the APIs and are you using it right or do we have validations for it and all sorts of things and dances that come with it. And so that from that point of view it's kind of like an interesting one, but one interesting kind of flavor, if you will, of frameworks that we are seeing quite a lot of is around what's being popularized as Jamstack, but it's not necessarily JavaScript involved, even like Jekyll, for example, and things that
Yep.
generate static sites. So I think a combination of the fact that you can build a fully functioning web page during the build side from a tool chain point of view. Then you have things like containers, which will allow you to do that pretty much anywhere in a uniform way. It's not just like works on my machine and then you take it to a server and all of a sudden one dependency is missing or something. So containers help with that. And at the same time, things around cloud, which is like S3 and serving web directly from the bucket with high availability, all of those things together kind of have lent itself really well to building, really content heavy things that don't necessarily need to have a database at the back. So, you look at things like WordPress, for example, where you had to, you wanted to just serve a web page and you go to MySQL and pull out the content and render it as a single page that just does that. Now, you can just build it during the build time. And even things around like web-based status pages where are seemingly dynamic, but you only need to update them during an incident can have this ability of just re-rendering and rebuilding it, pushing into S3. So your status page is highly available because it's hosted on something like S3 or like the flavor of that. So all of those kind of the interesting things. So, but then the downside is that as soon as you have a dynamic part to it, then okay, so where is that going to come from? So this is like, the two parts. If I got the question right, it's about like different, frameworks of kind of thought. I kind of see those as the two kind of main things. I think there are still glitches around the combination of those. If you have a backend that's running on, say, Rails, and you want to have a front end that's running on something else, there's still that kind of fluid stage. I don't think we've settled on anything yet. There's still the market's
But
going.
but it's good because very rarely I get to have these sort of these very informed conversations with a CEO. With a CTO is normal, right? Because they're much more in the mud and they're still keeping up with the technology. But the good thing about being a super technical CEO like yourself is that you get to understand certain concepts that have a direct implication on business, like technical debt, right? And I'm seeing a trend whereby some companies are starting to measure technical debt and have it as a KPI for business in the company,
Uh-huh.
right? Because at the very end, it's time to deploy to production. It's time to hire people. It's a cost in operations, effectively speaking. But non-technical CEOs don't seem to get it, right?
Right.
So it also there's a key. I don't know if that's correlation or causation, but the technical CEOs don't seem to go as often into the let's rewrite the entire application every 5 years. So you've stuck to Ruby on Rails for 10 plus years now, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever considered moving or like refactoring, rewriting the entire application with another backend language.
Yeah. No, we have not. Um,
Not under any such circumstances. Like it wasn't even like a passing thought. Okay,
no.
that's good enough.
So,
Yeah,
you sometimes you have. So here's the kind of the thing. It's like trading, devil you know and devil you don't. So, a
yeah.
lot of times we, if I were to think fresh and go, okay, you know what, I want to build a business that is going to do deployment of Rails and non-Rails, containerized and non-containerized, Jamstack and dynamic size and all this sort of stuff. What would be my technology of choice today? I might make different choices. But there are two things here is that, first of all, this is today, that was 10 years ago. There is about the availability of talent. There is a availability of like how fast can we get things to the market because it's a business after all. We cannot be all technical perfectionists. Um, but on the other hand, it's about what you know versus what you don't. So there might be a case that's that we stumble upon a problem that multi-threading in Ruby is not known for its strength on multi-threading. It does have support for that, and the fibers are coming along and all sorts of things. But if you were to say what is the language of choice if you wanted to write something super multi-threaded, probably Ruby is not the top of it. Maybe Erlang is, maybe Go, but
Yeah.
Ruby probably is not that. So a lot of times we get to the point that we have to solve a problem that involves a heavy multi-threading and race conditions and mutexes and weights and whatever else. And we go, oof, I wish that it was written in Erlang, right? And you go, well, what else would so at that point in time, when you have that specific problem, you might wish for a different thing, and as a passing thought, you might say, I wish my stack was something else. But what I'm at this point ignoring is like a line of 99 things in my stack that are actually working perfectly fine because they are running on Rails. So I don't know the implication of that. And if I were to run something on Go, then my web, active record would have suffered quite a lot. My interactions with database would have been probably a very different kind of beast. So it's easy to make those assumptions when you're like, like when you wake up in the middle of the night and you think, oof, I'm going to solve that problem. I wish I had Go or like Rust or something. But realistically, that's not there. And because, you have that kind of in your top of your mind, we never thought about, what, let's just like rewrite the whole thing. As I said, the only foray that we had into some sort of split between the front and the back was when we did Vue. And I think we suffered from two things. One is that we were also learning Vue. It was a very new framework. It was a while back. And the second thing is, you don't want to halt business. You don't want to stop everything and just like, hi customers, I'm sorry, I'm not going to roll out any new features. I'm not going to fix any bugs because I'm busy rewriting my front end in Vue. So you have to, roll it out piecemeal. And that involves a lot of complexity with the tool chain compiling, deployment methods, and assets and CDN and everything else. And you go, is it worth it? Really? What are we going to get at the end of it? So, we are still running Rails.
Yeah, because it was 2016 or sometime around that when we were seeing everybody was migrating everything to Go. Go was supposedly the Rails killer back in 2016, and then Elixir came around, and guess what? None of them really killed Rails, right? And I don't think anything will kill Rails for the time being. Like maybe Python, if we keep seeing so many people moving into Python nowadays because of AI and big data. But definitely like Rails has got this, what you mentioned, right? This like it's super strong, super cohesive. 99% of projects are built with Rails. So 99% of Ruby projects are built with Rails. There's no dispersion of
Yeah,
the
that's right.
of frameworks, right? And other strengths that it has. But you briefly mentioned that you have got something in Go, which we all assume it's like a microservice. And what you mentioned, concurrency and whatnot. we so that it was a trend that we have sort of suffered as a service provider, because I remember like 2017 was kind of like the explosion of like people going into everything is serverless, and most people went into serverless just because it was a trend, and we were actively advising people, but you can only go so far as a service provider, right? You can counsel, but if the client wants it to build it this way, you gotta go fucking do it because
Yep.
they pay you to do it, right? But anyway, so we were seeing that the case with new startups and people maybe lesser experienced people were opting for a super complicated technology like serverless, and it was definitely over engineering in 90% of the cases. None of them got it right. And now what we're seeing nowadays is that mostly this kind of architecture is built inside of something bigger. But
Yep.
like the whole architecture is not serverless. It's just like this part that deals with the IoT messaging, this part that deals with, concurrent deployments and whatnot.
Sure.
And this is something that you can probably explain a little bit farther.
Yeah, that's true. So, again, it's kind of the same thing. If you think about the front end technologies, you wait long, enough, and you see the resurgence of the same kind of concepts. Yeah, just an example on the front end. I'm not sure if you remember, during the .NET kind of popularity on Windows side of things,
Mm-hmm.
there was the whole Windows front end or Windows framework, like front end framework or something that was exactly like what like React components looked like to a great degree. It was not for web, it was for desktop applications on Windows, but WPA and WPF, I think it was called, and all those sort of things around that, kind of the same thing. And they just died down because web and who builds desktop applications, then all the whole thing. But when it comes to backend applications, it's kind of like the same thing. You have this kind of microservices versus what it was service-oriented architecture like about 20 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. So like 15 years ago, everything was about service-oriented architecture. You had Java developers coming in with beans and having Spring framework with configuring an application was basically you had like these mile-long XML documents that would configure your application with your services, factories, repositories, and the domain-driven design, and all sorts of things that would just glue these tiny pieces of code together. Now, it would compile into a single monolith, but from a developer's point of view, I'm just writing on this, working on this service, which is then configured and dependency injection, inversion of control, all those concepts that we were looking at 15, 20 years ago, kind of were around that. And with that comes a bunch of challenges, right? So you have configuration challenges, you have traceability challenges, distributed transactions when it comes to database logging, all sorts of things that you have to solve. It doesn't mean it's impossible. It doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing. It's just these challenges that you don't have when you deal with a monolith. Now, on the other hand, when you're dealing with a monolith, you have other challenges, but different challenges. Now, going with one versus the other because the old way is just bad and the new way is good. In the same way that we go object oriented is bad, functional is good, or like closures are good versus like go tos are bad. Like it's just not different paradigms, each suitable for one thing. And microservices on the other hand, with the rise of containerization, Kubernetes, and everything else, seem to kind of created a hype and a wave that people kind of really wanted to jump on. And I think Go was a beneficiary of that in a way that, if I want to run microservices, if I want to run serverless, then I'll end up writing something that can be independent, self-compiled, small, and Go is a good candidate. So is Rust. And you can create that. So Go benefits from it. But then you get into, well, hang on a second. I have no server, I have no persistence. So what am I going to about persistence? What if I want to store a file? Where would I? Oh, you put it into S3, but there's latency and all sorts of things around that that just gets into this kind of cycle that we see now. Everybody goes back out of microservices, back out of Kubernetes, and goes like, you know what? I'm just going to build this super solid monolith. So I think the sweet thing, like any good question, the answer is it depends. So, you take the problem, you look at it, in depth, and you choose the right technology. And, I don't think you can. So there was a time that you and I remember, it was like everybody wanted to put their grandmothers into a container. Now, it's
Yeah.
kind of different.
So, what is your prediction for the future with regards to serverless deployment, right? Because back in the day, Lambda was all the hype. It seems it's cooled down. Like, we got big players like Vercel and Cloudflare like pushing for developments at edge, and Shopify has partnered with Cloudflare to bring that as well. So, I don't know. Like, what is? We want to know the opinion of an expert on this. What is the forecast?
Hardly I have my crystal ball with me today. Um, but but I mean that's a very good question. So I think none of those technologies that we've seen is going to die anytime soon. Um, and a lot of those have these kind of tendency of having the hype. Remember what is that? Like a Corva, or was it like the WASM, what was it like WASML or WASP or whatever, like these protocols that
Yeah.
gRPC wanted to replace, all that kind of
Mhm.
everything around that. So I think we will settle into a phase. It doesn't mean that we're not gonna have new hypes, but with the existing technologies that are coming down the hype kind of hill, we will settle on serverless having its own space for stateless, just question answer functional things like IoT, things like personal assistance, voice recognition, that kind of stuff. When you have a problem, you have a question, it needs to go away, think about it, come back, and that's basically the end of the transaction. There is no accounts, there's no login, there's no persist my data, upload my files, or there's none of that. I think that's kind of one part. From a database technology, I think we've seen already the resurgence of RDBMS, albeit in different forms, where it's more distributed as opposed to the world of MongoDB hype, where everything was kind of schemaless and nobody cared about joins and nobody wanted to talk about indices and all sorts of things. Everything was queried through MapReduce and JavaScript. So I think that kind of settled down. But it didn't mean that, document database of MongoDB died, right? It doesn't also mean that we put everything in Redis. We now started using Redis for what it is, which is a very good, robust key value store with a wide range of data structures that it supports. But we know don't go around and put our customer data in there. We have MongoDB or document-based databases for a lot of cases, like truly schemaless data. And we still have Postgres, which is going strength through strength, as a normal old school 40-year-old technology underlying, coming back from like 1980s and 70s in Berkeley University, where you have RDBMS technology essentially being board ACID transactions and all those kind of crazy arcane ideas, which are working perfectly fine and are very suitable for building scalability. So all of that is a long way of saying that I think technologists have a tendency of settling down to what they are very good at, and people tend to use them for that. So to me, containerization is here to stay. It doesn't mean that we got to put everything in containers, but I think it's there to create what it's good for, and that's a separation between devs and ops, and that's what it does. And if you need separation between your devs and ops, containers are probably a good thing. Functional programming and fast Lambda and serverless again have appeal in two cases. One is security, when people don't want to think about their servers and patching and restarting. The second thing is when you don't have any persistence, everything is very short-term transactions. And monolith have their own kind of merit. So I think we're settling down on those things. It doesn't mean we're not going to have new hypes. Tomorrow there's going to be like a wave about God knows, like event-driven container lambdas, whatever that means. But I mean,
With AI.
yeah, exactly. Now you have you want to run everything in a browser. I'm sure there will
Yeah.
be like a complete database that you can run in your browser. But is it going to replace Postgres? Probably not.
Yeah, which brings me to the question because while we're seeing a lot I'm also an investor myself, and I see this in the startups. I try to advise them technologically, and it is very hard for a company to not give in to some of the really strongly opinionated developers that want to change technology and adopt this new hype, right? How do you deal with this internally? Like, say, we're very strong in Rails, we're really strong in React, but somebody says like we could build this in Go. It's like we don't do freaking Go, right?
Mhm.
Or this technology that is not sufficiently, it's not battle tested, and in some companies we've seen this is a recipe for failure. Sometimes it can work out, but that's more the exception rather than the rule.
That's
And
right.
so how do you deal internally with the expectations, and how are like frameworks and libraries decided? Is it like a grassroots movement, or is it like a top down in your company?
So this is a challenge, and it's a very good question. This is a challenge that we also have, and I think the way we do it kind of goes back to your point about technically experienced leadership. I think that kind of helps a lot. So I think we've, at least at Cloud 66, when it comes to user interface and UX, our lead UX person is a very experienced developer, and he's the guy who kind of holds the fort when we have a new hype in the market. Let's just rip everything out and replace it with some React-based flavor, Next.js, Next or whatever. And he would just say, okay, let's just wait. Let's just see how it plays out. It has these issues. What we're going to do with this, and and that's kind of a good thing. You can think of it as a kind of like a technology conservatism in a way,
Yeah.
where when you're experienced and having seen these trends come and go and settle into their own places, and you hold and wait until things play out, or you see something as a vision and you go, this is not going to play out where you think it's going to go. And I might be wrong. And you kind of hold that. And because of just the nature of the thing that you are a senior position, you can, have the veto. Most of the time, you end up being right, not because you are right, because you just, biased towards your decisions. But there is a danger there. As I'm personally speaking for myself, as I get older and as I gain more, become more conservative in my, you know, decision making, as all human beings become, because we have more investments to protect. Um, I am exposed to the bias and danger of not listening to new ideas, being more conservative and more closed off to radical change, and not being open to having those accepted in my workflow in my life. So when we hire a new fresh talent who's extremely intelligent, very good at what they do, and are very much in touch with the new technologies, you kind of, and here's the balance that kind of comes with that management. They come to you with an idea, and you don't want to constantly, push them back and say, no, that's not going to work. No, it's a business. It's not a lab. We're not a research facility. We're not a charity. You don't want to do that, because that discourages innovation. And also it plays into your own biases, right? It makes you more closed off. But so you have to kind of have that thing that you sometimes give in, sometimes experiment, and you have to have a kind of a structure for that. Like, how much are we allowing experiments? What is the scope? How do we roll this out? Are we rolling out throughout the whole thing, or we have in a different areas? One of the things, for example, just an example of that we've done with our code base is we have kind of risk areas within the code base. There are areas that we are very conservative about the technology. When it comes to security, networking, and firewalls, we are extremely conservative. Making a change there requires so many different code reviews and so many approvals. And let alone like technology change in there probably is not going to happen, because that's an extremely high risk area for us. But we have very low risk areas around our code base as well. That you can just make changes and you can experiment. So if we want to kind of even at some point say, maybe we should experiment with this new way of doing things. Maybe we should experiment with new technology, as old guards, as old people, as conservative, kind of dinosaurs of technology. I'm speaking for myself. You know, um, we have areas that we can let people play. We have areas that we can let them experiment. And I think that is how we balancing it. I don't think it's the best way. I might not be. It's not the only way for sure, but it kind of works for us that way.
It's actually very interesting. I was while you were explaining it, I could see the whole code base being painted in different colors, and I was like, "This is red. Don't fucking touch it. This is green. Marketing pages not very important, right? You can play around here." But
We
I don't know if
actually
that's how
have
you do it. But
I know we have I know we have one file in our code base that has a very big all caps comment at the top. It says, "Do not touch this unless you actually know what you're talking about." As a great man said, with great responsibility, with great power comes great responsibility, Uncle Ben. So
yeah,
if you touch this, you need to know what you're doing. So,
yeah.
there are files that even like are super red.
Be prepared to face the wrath of our CEO, right?
Yes,
You
that's
touch
that's
this file.
basically it. Yeah, it
Look,
doesn't mean that I am a very big advocate of simplicity over cleverness. I really
yeah,
don't like clever because I'm not necessarily a clever person myself. I don't like clever code. I don't like
hmm.
regex that much. It's like somebody comes and says, "Look at this. I consolidated 20 lines of code into one." I'll be like, "No, I want 20 because I can
Yeah,
read it and I can understand. Even if I write it, I'm sure 6 months down the line I wouldn't be able like what was I smoking when I wrote this? It
yeah.
works, but I cannot check it. I cannot test it. I cannot change it. So a lot of times it doesn't mean that we have this code that's super fragile and super complicated that we just put a big comment and said don't touch because you got to break something and you wouldn't know. It's more about, look, it's simple, it works, and it's super sensitive. It's not about fragility, but it's about sensitivity. So that's why we have those kind of code parts.
Spot on. That was really good. Thank you for sharing. We got a couple of questions. Our CTO has sent a couple of questions because
Sure.
obviously I think throughout the years of using Cloud 66 and then here it's like I've noticed a couple of things that are relevant maybe. So one of them with regards to the pricing. Seems like you guys have been experimenting with different pricing plans and tiers and whatnot. And from charging by server to charging by CPU cores and all of that. So other platforms like Heroku, they have been more conservative. And so, what have you learned with all these pricing changes over the years?
Pricing change is probably the most scary thing that I will I have done and I will ever do. I don't think I will ever get to that. And the reason for that is that if I were to go to the market and sell, I don't know, this cable for, $100 and I'll price it for $100, right? I don't know if I'm going to sell it or not. And when it comes to startups, when it comes to a new idea or a new way of doing things, there's a lot of cases that you don't know whether you have a product market fit or you actually priced it wrong. It's just too expensive or it's too cheap. So it attracts the wrong kind of audience. So pricing is a kind of one of those things that you cannot really be sure until it's out. You cannot say you kind of rely on gut feel until it's out. You go, I think 20 is good because I kind of feel that's good. Or you look at your competitors. And when it comes to SaaS, pricing is not based on the labor and the cost of material. And a lot of that just goes away as you scale. So you have to kind of price mostly based on the value you add, and what you add in terms of value to developers' daily life, is a subjective thing. You measure it by hours you save because it's spread across a long time with a team of different shapes and forms. So when we roll it out, then the other challenge with kind of pricing is that you pretty much can never lower your price. Because if I start selling this, I mean, a lot of companies do it. We just don't want to do it. Like if I go to my phone company, mobile company, cellular company, right? And I pay, I don't know, $20 a month for a phone line. And then tomorrow they reduce the price to 10. I cannot go back and say, hang on a second, I just signed up yesterday and now I'm on the hook for 20 for a year. Can you give me the deal? What's that? No, no, no. That's for new customers only. With SaaS, you don't have that, right? If I were to go, I'm going to start with 100, and then I realize it's too expensive, and then I reduce it to 80, all my customers who are paying 80, 100 are going to come back and say, well, what about me? And if I say, no, it's new customers only, they go and say, screw you, I'm going to cancel my account. I'm going to sign up another account. And it's just as good as the next one or the old one, and I'll just benefit from that. So always you see that companies, especially SaaS companies, they start very low and they kind of increase the price as opposed to the other way around. But the danger in that is if you give away something too cheap or subsidized by VC money, which is a lot of companies do, you do that, you're in danger of undervaluing your product market fit. If I go around the corner and just hand out $1 bills to anybody who passes by and say, "Oh, I have hyper growth," like, sure. I mean, if
Yeah,
I
sure.
give up, yeah, it's like I'm gonna give you a
Until
dollar.
money runs out, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like
Uh,
that's exactly what a lot of companies do. They just go and subsidize a dollar bill with 90 cents because the VC pays the other 10 cents. And they go, we
yeah.
have hyper growth. Look at the stars we have on our GitHub account. Like, okay. So pricing is that's why it's such a challenging thing. So what we've done is that we wanted to we rolled out our pricing, the original pricing, which was per server. And for a long time, we always charged per server because we thought that's a true reflection of the value we add to a customer's life. If you have we don't want to have a contract that locks you in for 2 years at a level that you might be using to experiment with your own startup and your own idea. So we thought server is a good measure. But recently we changed that for a very simple reason. We changed it to uh, usual a traditional SaaS buckets of 29 and 49, and it gives you a bundle of those. The unit price for servers is still the same. We're not increasing or decreasing that. It's still per server the same, but you buy it in a bundle. And the reason is predictability. That's another thing that people really care about, it seems. And I understand why, justifiably so. Because the last thing you want is to think about your bank account every time you click a button to say scale up. And those two things are not necessarily interlinked. You might want to scale up for some other thing that actually brings you enough revenue to justify that cost. So as you go and say, I'm going to add 5 servers because it's Christmas time and I'm getting more customers to my Christmas shop. I don't want to, have that conversation with my CFO or my CTO or whoever's signing the check to say, by the way, this month we're going to pay $200 more because I just clicked this button 20 times, right? So the reason we did that was because of this predictability, trying to add some visibility into your cost. That's the reason for what we're doing. And the other thing is for us, the other reason was feature distinction. The biggest cost that we have is engineering, and we spend that engineering hour on building new features. Now, if you look at our usage for feature, deployment is by far the highest. Then we have other features around debugging, like logs and metrics and other things, which uses, and then the rest of the features, and we have hundreds of features that are a very, very long tail. Not everybody uses failover groups, for example. Not everybody uses database replication. Some people do, some people don't. Not everybody uses some sort of extreme security paranoid mode like 2FA that we have. Some people do, some people don't. And every one of these features that we build costs us a lot of money. So I don't want to charge everyone for the
For all
money
of
that
them,
we
yeah.
spend on something that only a few people use. So you want to distinguish between those. So if you're one of those people who wants like super locked down 2FA with 2 keys and a backflip, then you pay a little bit more per server than somebody else. It's not that the value of that server has gone up. It's just that you want to make the product cheaper for people who don't use everything you have and get the other ones to pay for what they use.
Awesome. So we got time for only one last question. I want to be very, very serious with your time, and you've been extremely generous. So this is a signature question of the podcast. So what's been your biggest technological fuck up, and if you can quantify it with money? Something you've done yourself. I mean, you got to own up to it. It's not, and
Something I've done.
most people try to give me the crap of I hired the wrong person. No, it's just like something technical, something
I
that you have coded yourself, wipe out a database, something like
Right.
that.
So if it is about Cloud 66, I have done it a lot and I cannot measure
Yeah.
even the cost. But in my career, I've done also a lot. This is a function of time. I'm going to blame it on my age. It's like, I've done,
Bonus points if it's Lehman Brothers related because they're not going to come around to shoot
yeah, I
you.
brought
So
down
it's
the whole
good.
financial industry.
That would have been awesome. Thank you for doing that. No, just kidding. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
I I know that what I did was it wasn't a Cloud 66, but it was in another financial kind of company. I was responsible for building a caching framework for storing very expensive calculations. And the idea was that you have these calculations around financial instrument that takes a lot of time to calculate. So we would calculate a lot of them and warm up a cache and put it into cache. And I was responsible for the caching framework. One day I come to the office and I see a giant toy donkey sitting at my chair. And I realized that I won the Donkey of the Week award. And the award was given by our CTO to the biggest fuck off of the week. And it turned out that I made a tiny change in the caching framework that meant our cache hit went from like 80% to zero. And he went into production because caching is one of the hardest things to test. So he went and out into production, and that every customer's account ran to a halt because we had to calculate these things. It was a cache miss every time. So yeah, I guess that would. How much did it cost? Luckily, it cost me only a donkey, but the company probably paid a lot more.
Yeah, I don't know if they were compensating people on downtime and whatnot, but I like
Yeah.
probably a few dollars. I mean, that donkey was a bargain in comparison. Well,
Yes, I won the
thank
donkey.
you.
So
That's good. That's a really good one. Thank you very much, Cash.
absolutely.
30 seconds for you in rolling out the carpet. So, what can we do to help your company, Cloud 66, or yourself? What's going on?
Oh, well, well, for me, it was an honor to be on your show, and thank you very much for giving the chance and the time. Um, we are here to help software developers. So, as your audience are also software developers, I hope that we can help. And thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to present what we do. And hopefully we will, going forward, help a lot of software developers and fellow developers of our community.
We will. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You have a good one.